have a nice scene in Blender set up to teach you guys about cameras, lights, and rendering overall. So to begin with, cameras. This is what the camera looks like in our Blender scene. It's a little rectangle and it's got lines coming off it. Anyways, generally your scene starts with a camera, and the camera is how you select what area in the render or in your composition that you're going to render. So only what the camera sees is going to get rendered. But sometimes, you get rid of your camera, you lose it, whatnot. You can see it up here too, so if you lost it, maybe it'll be in here. If it's not, you can add a new one. It's easy. You just go to Add, or if you want to do the little shortcut, Shift A, and then go down to Camera, and just click Camera. And as you can see, we've got a nice, fresh camera right here. So now we have two cameras, but we don't need this one, so I'm going to get rid of it. Yeah, so once you have a camera, you're going to have to see where it's aiming. And right now, it's kind of hard to tell, what is it seeing? But it's quite easy. You just click this little movie reel button, or the camera button, toggle the camera view, and as you can see, you get zoomed in to what the camera is seeing. And what the camera is seeing is outlined by this box. Now, since I have the camera selected, it's orange. If I didn't have the camera selected, let's say I select something else, it'll be a black line. But, either way, this is just what the camera sees. So anything that's not darkened is what the camera sees. Everything that is darkened is what the camera does not see. And if you want to move the camera around, and if you want to leave that view, just rotate your camera like this, and then it'll just pop out automatically. But if you want to aim and move your camera, you can move it like any other object with, your move, rotate commands. But you can also go into the camera and have the camera already selected. You'll know that because it'll be outlined by orange. And then you can go up to this little drop-down menu for its transformations, go to rotation or even location, and you can use these little sliders or change the numbers to 10. And then, you can change where it's aiming. So those are both great ways to move your camera around. In your Blender view, you might already have a light. Your original light that spawns with the scene looks like this. This is a point light. And you can see that in your scene collection menu, lights are shown as little light bulbs, and they're generally named light or, spotlight or something in that manner. So how do you get lights? You go to Add, you go to Light, and then you have 4 options: point, sun, spot, and area. But, right now, as you can see, I already have a light down in the scene, but you can't see any light. That's because I'm in solid shading mode. And we've got wireframe, solid shading, texture shading, and then also, texture preview, and then the full render engine, respectively, in this little menu. So if I click between them, you can see wireframe mode, everything's a wireframe. We've got solid, which is what I was on, everything's solid. We've got, everything's just going to be this gray color. There's going to be no lighting, no textures, whatnot. And this is, really fast, so if you have a really complicated scene with a lot of textures, then it might be easier to, do scene composition and modeling in this mode so you don't cause excessive lag to your machine. We've also got texture preview shading, so this will kind of show, I've got a metallic sort of thing on these blocks. It's not super duper accurate, but it's also faster than just that render engine, and it'll show you what blocks or what objects in your scene have what textures, but it won't show lighting properly. To really show lighting, you should go to the very far end, which is the render viewport shading. And this is going to show you, with the actual render engine in live time, what your scene is going to look like. So right now I've got it set on cycles. You can just change that in your render properties, and I'll go over all of this rendering later. But we've got cycles, and we've also got Eevee and Workbench. Workbench is, the basic, solid shading, whatever. So generally we don't use that for our render engine. We generally use Cycles or Eevee, and Eevee is the more basic render engine. It has lighting. It's a lot nicer looking than everything else, but it's not super fancy. As you can see, the reflections aren't really there. The shadows look a little more janky, but it's a lot faster than Cycles. It's not as intensive. But Cycles is a really nice render engine. As you can see, it's significantly more laggy. Um, I've got a pretty decent computer, and even still, it is not super duper fast. But if we let it render a little bit, you can see there's nice reflections in the metal and whatnot. So generally, this is what I like using. But now that we have our rendering view on, you can see our area light is casting light on the ground. And it just casts light off in all the directions because it's nearest to the ground right here. It's just brightest right here. But there's 4 types of lights. So I'll show you how to use all of the types of lights and also all of their settings. So first of all, I'm just going to duplicate this, Shift D if you're interested, or you can just make a new light. But since I already have a light here with settings, I'm just going to make a new one, or duplicate the old one. And as you can see, this is a point light. So if I want to go to my light settings, go to the bottom right, to this little menu right here, and there's a light bulb, a green light bulb, object data properties. Click that, and it'll open your light properties. And right now, you can rename it, so I'll call this test light. Please delete later. As you can see, I am a proper English knowledger. I can spell. So here it's a point light. You can change it to a sun, a spotlight, and an area light. But to begin with, we're going to go with the point light. Right here, you can change the color. So if I, spin this in a circle, you can see everything is changing color. This is because it's emitting a different color light from itself. Let's say we want to make the whole scene, I don't know, pink. So we've got a pink point light now. And as you can see, if I let it render, everything emitted from, that's being shined on by this light is purple. You can change the power of the light here. So if I turn it all the way down, you can see it's super dim now. Most of the stuff back here is not purple anymore, but if I turn it, to really high, then everything is super bright and purple. But we'll leave it at like 1000 right now. Radius, you can change the size of the point light. Honestly, with point lights, it's not super important. We'll just keep it at like 1 or 0.1. And then there's all this other stuff, which doesn't really matter too much for what you guys are going to be doing. We also have sun. So sun is the second type of light. Now sun, I would recommend changing the strength down lower, because essentially what it is it's a sun in a nebulous space up somewhere, and it's just shining a bunch of light beams down the direction that the light is pointing. So this orange line is where the sun is pointing. So that's where the light rays are directed. And if I move this around, you can see that it changes where the light kind of goes. It's a little hard to tell in this scene. But if I point it this way, you can see the lights are pointing that way. So this wall is blocking the light rays that are coming from this direction. So, the direction does matter a little bit. As always, you can change the color. So, it can be green now. We've got our angle, so that's what this is. You can just move it around like this. With this little yellow dot, you drag and hold to kind of point it wherever you want it to aim. And same like everything, you just change the settings around until you like it. We've got spotlight. Now spotlight is a little different from the other two. It's more like the sun, I guess, than the other one. Why is it so big? I'm just going to make a new one. I think because I changed it from the sun, it got a little silly. Alright, so we've got a new spotlight. Now spotlights generally look like this. Now, this is kind of a representation of the path the light is going to take. It starts at a point, and it widens out like a spotlight in the direction that you're seeing. And like the sun, you can aim it, but you can also use this blue arrow to kind of widen or directionalize the light beams. So let's make this a little brighter, so you can kind of see what it's doing. As you can see, it's shining a light kind of like a spotlight from the where it is to in the direction of the cone. So if I aim it around like the sun, it'll move where the spotlight is, have nice little shadows there. I can widen it or directionalize it down to a point. And like everything else, you can move it around. You can rotate it, whatnot. But let's say I don't really want a spotlight. I want an area light. Now, area light is a little different than the other view. Let's make it a little bit less bright. So first I'm going to scale it up, just so you can see it better. Now this rectangle is a representation of where the light's going to come from. And I can change the shape of it, in this side menu, like everything else. I'm going to go rectangle, disk, so now it's a circle, ellipse, so I can, scale it so it's like oval. And this is kind of like the spotlight, in which you can aim it around, it's directional, and you can change the color as well. One last form of lighting that I forgot to mention is the world lighting. As you can see, the world is brown in the scene. Generally it is not, generally it's gray when you start out. As you can see, if I go to solid shading, it looks like this. This is what the base world looks like. So in your scene, it won't be brown. Now why is it brown in my scene, and how does this affect lighting? So why is it brown? Because I set it to be brown. And you can change it in your world settings. So right now I don't have anything selected. Let's say I have a random object selected. In this little menu, you can access the world by clicking on world properties. It's the little red globe. And you can see there's a color and a strength. Right now I have it set on brown, but you can change it to, for example, blue, and then it'll cast blue light on your scene from all directions. This is just the ambient light in the world, and right now it's blue. Let's say I don't want it to be blue anymore. I'll set it back to brown because I like it more. You can also change the strength here. Right now it's at 0.7. If I change it all the way down, it means there's no light coming from anywhere else in the scene but my point light here. If I turn it, up a bunch, everything will look super washed out because there's a lot of ambient light coming into the scene, so it's super duper bright. So, let's say you have your scene set up like you like it. You've got your camera all set up, as you can see. I've got my camera set up in a way that I like my composition. So you have your camera set up, you've got your lighting set up, you've got nice lighting, and you're happy with your scene that you want to render it. The first thing you're going to want to do is come over to this Render Properties tab. Make sure that you have the correct render engine open for what you want to do. Depending on what you want, you may want Eevee, you may want Cycles. Eevee, more simplistic, as I said earlier. Cycles, ray tracing, very nice, but a little more intensive. You also want to, set up what you want your computer to render with, your CPU or GPU. For most of the stuff that, just one render, it shouldn't matter too much unless your computer doesn't have a GPU or something, but in that case, it probably won't let you choose it. Alright, so now down to the important stuff down below. We've got all of these settings. Now, for the most part, for very basic renders, and for renders you guys will be doing, most of the settings aren't super important. What we really want to focus on is the max samples, as well as denoising. Make sure your denoising is on. If I turn it off, you can see there's a lot of these dots, and it looks kind of bad. But I turn denoising on, it'll kind of smooth it out, and it'll look good. And you want to definitely have it on for your final render, otherwise you'll have a lot of those dots, and it'll look a little funny. So right now I have my max samples set pretty low, and if yours are not set pretty low, let's say for my viewport, so this is viewport, and then the actual render settings, they're separate so that you can change your viewport settings down, so when you're, trying to get a preview of what your render will be, it's not super duper laggy, but then when you render it, it'll look nice. Let's say I set it to 100. As you can see, it's I don't know, I guess it's not visibly more laggy. Let me just turn it up a little. So if I go to a lot of max samples, and then turn off denoising, as you can see, it'll just keep on rendering and rendering and rendering, and all of these dots will get smaller and smaller as everything kind of gets computed. But generally, you don't want like super high max samples for your viewport. You know, you can definitely get away with just 10. And you can also use denoising. But on your actual render, you know, you want it to be a little higher. Let's say, I don't know, 32. 32 gives you a pretty decent render, you know, 64 as well. The higher this number is, the longer it'll take to do the final render. In my case, I'm just going to do 32. So now that you have your render settings all set up, you know, you can also set your resolution here. So this will be the one below the little camera. It's the output properties. You can set your resolution. Right now it's 1920 by 1080p. Yeah, that's what matters, I believe. Okay, so you've got your render engine chosen, you've got your samples chosen, you've got your resolution chosen. Now you want to render. Go up to your little render button up here in the top left, click it, and then click render image. And your computer will load for a little while, and then you'll have this screen pop up with your render, and at the top it'll tell you how long it's been, how long it estimates is remaining. In my case right now it's like 13 seconds. You know, how much memory you're using, you know, scene layer, sample layer will give you a lot of interesting information here. But for the most part, if you're just doing a single image render, just look at your time remaining. If it's ludicrously high, maybe just click the X button, cancel the render, and change your max samples for your render settings down a little. But as you can see, right now it's done. It's finished. There's no more time remaining. And I can zoom in and out with my scroll wheel, and you can see my render is done. And it's got nice reflections, nice shadows. Quite a nice render, very pleasant to look at. It's brown. And let's say you really like it and you want to keep it, you can go to Image, Save, and then you can name it, choose where it goes, and then just save as image. There's all these options as well. You can save it as, you know, a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF, whatever file you want.